Um, we learned in yesterday's Tanya that the way our world is made up is that, by the way, I need some more faces. I can't see everybody here. The way our world is made up is that there is the wisdom is the first part of creation. There's like 5 steps of separation. And then after wisdom comes understanding. After understanding comes knowledge. That's all one. That's intellectual. From intellect, it gets to emotions. So the wisdom creates emotions. Then from emotion, it goes back to the brain to figure out how to process the emotions. And that's the 3rd step. And then that leads to speech, which is the 4th step, because what you think about, you then speak about. And that leads to the final step, which is action. So 5 steps of separation from beginning of creation to the end. So then what we're going to say today, when we said in yesterday's Tanya, was that each of those steps of separation are very far. They're infinitely distant from each other, which means that the emotions I feel in my heart, a feeling relative to my brain processing those feelings, they're very different than each other. Or even the next step, the thoughts my brain is having to my speech, that I'm speaking the words that are in my brain, they're very different kind of speech. So maybe my brain could think 100 miles an hour and my speech only comes out however many words per minute. So, and they're also different kinds. They're much more physical words in the way I think about it. I can think about all kinds of stuff, but to speak about it's much harder. And then also, by the way, from the way I articulate words in my lips to how I do things in action, they're also very distant from each other. So each of those 5 steps of separation are very distant from each other. So we have the highest, the first, where everything originates from, where all of creation originates from, and that is from the idea of wisdom, the first tiny drop of creation, developing and developing till it comes to our physical action in our world. So he's going to say now, and let me explain an analogy to this, a simple analogy that helped me understand it, that just sits in my mind from years ago. Maybe it'll just simple idea. So basically, you have a 2-year-old kid having a conversation with, let's say, a 4-year-old kid. 4-year-old kid looks at the 2-year-old kid and says, wow, I'm so much smarter than you. I know how to go to the bathroom. I know how to tie my shoes. I'm way more intelligent. I know how to speak. And the 2-year-old could barely speak. The 4-year-old child is much more advanced than the 2-year-old kid, and he knows it and he sees it and he can do much more. He's much more advanced. But then the 2-year-old kid and the 4-year-old kid walk into a high-level college course on physics, astrophysics, whatever it is. They want a very high-level course, and the 2-year-old and the 4-year-old both sit down in chairs and they listen. So relative to the level of that class, the 4-year-old and 2-year-old equally have no clue what's going on. So in other words, at some point, you get so far beyond the 2-year-old and the 4-year-old that the 2-year-old and 4-year-old equally have no idea what's going on. They're in the same playing field, even though when the 2-year-old and 4-year-old talk to each other and they're like, wow, I know much more than you, I'm much more sophisticated than you. But when you get so much further out, those two things that look to be, the 2-year-old and 4-year-old, that look to be very different than each other, one more mature than the other, relative to what we're talking about now, you're both clueless. So even though in our world, wisdom is so much further than action, and it's so many steps of separation and distance from each other, one being way more spiritual, one being much more mundane and physical, that they're worlds apart from each other, relative to Hashem, it's all one playing field, which means our most brilliant wisdom that we have, the origination of creation of the world, relative to God, they're all like the lowest level, they're all like action relative to Hashem. That's what one of the main points he wants to say to them. And basically, again, the overall view he wants to say is that God's way of working, the way God's system works, God's intellect is just completely and utterly beyond our capability to understand, because even our greatest, highest level of understanding is nothing relative to Hashem, because our greatest intellect is like action in Hashem's world. Now inside, relative to Hashem, the level of wisdom, which in our world, which wisdom is the beginning of intellect and the beginning of all creation. When you start comparing that to the Creator Himself, even our deepest, most greatest intellect, it's like action, it's physical. Just like by us, the distance between thought to physical, mundane action is worlds apart. By Hashem, even the thought, our deepest part, is considered like worlds apart, like physical action to Him. Which means our intellect is like action mayasem kidiksiv, and this is actually portrayed in the verses of creation. It says, "Kulam b'chachma asisa," that with God's wisdom everything was created. King David says in Psalms, right? We read the Psalms now in chapter 104, which wasn't the Tehillim from a few days ago. It says that everything with wisdom, although Hashem used wisdom to create it, but again, the whole idea of wisdom is really just considered like physical action by Hashem. So it mixes up the words wisdom and the word action together, that Hashem made physically action, everything through wisdom. So Hashem's wisdom went straight to action. Which means to say, that just like it's worlds apart in our life, wisdom to physical action is complete worlds apart. That wisdom by us in our relativity, right? In our world of relativity, wisdom is the beginning of us. It's the beginning of all of creation, the origination of everything, which is a very high spiritual level. That when you start going up the ladder, which means the lowest level, the physical action level, you go up to speech, which uses shapes and forms, letters to speak. Though the shapes and forms of physical act world is very different than the shapes and forms of the speech world. It's nothing relative to, so the physical world, shapes and forms in the physical world is nothing relative to the shapes and forms of speech. It doesn't recognize it, right? Like a word doesn't recognize a table. It doesn't realize it exists because in the world of word, it's a very different, deeper world. And then also the speech relative to intellect, the way you think, the way the letters and shapes work in intellect is nothing relative compared to the world of letters that form in the speech world. Then the speech world, the intellect world that connects to the emotional worlds. Again, so emotional world and the intellect world are also worlds apart. They are the emotional relative to the original wisdom that created the emotions. They're also infinite worlds apart. Just like within our world, each of these steps are worlds apart and they're totally not comparable to different levels, though one comes from another. That's so too the deepest level that the human being will reach, the most highest level sophistication of intellectual world that the human being will reach. Once it gets to God, it loses all its prestige. It's like the lowest of lowest level. It's all action. Everything over there relative to our highest level is nothing compared to Hashem. Because God is Meroimam, Bamisnase, He is exalted, He's elevated. Myriads of degrees, many points of separation. Even much greater than the 5 steps of separation that between our original wisdom to our physical action, Hashem is much more separated. Thousands of levels more separated. In our world, we only start from the beginning to the bottom. There's only 5 major levels of separation: wisdom, and until it works its way down to emotion, which is the second step, works its way back to intellect, which is the third step, works its way to speech, and then from speech to action. Our world is made up of these 5 different steps, these 5 different layers of separation. However, so that's not a lot. But by God, starting from the world of Chachma, which is considered nothing by Hashem, there's thousands of levels up. Just like we have so many levels of separation, there's infinite levels between Hashem and the whole beginning of creation of the world. And therefore, as we're going to say in Tanya, how do you think it's even possible for the human being to comprehend and understand the Creator when it's something that's so impossible? If the world of speech can't understand the world of intellect, the world of action can't speak the language of the world of speech, how is it possible for one to be able to understand Hashem? And it makes sense that we can understand God. And that is the end of today's class. And Tanya will continue more on this topic, with Hashem's help tomorrow as we continue to unpackage these ideas. Have a great day, everyone. It's beautiful learning with all of you, and a great conversation today. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, 12 o'clock with Hashem's help. We'll see you then.
We need a few more David, Rabbi. We need a few more David.